Imagine waking up on Christmas morning only to hear the news that an icon has passed away. That's what happened on these fateful days. Here are the world-famous people who died on Christmas Day. James Brown, the Godfather of Soul. James Brown managed to make almost as many headlines in death as he did in life. That's because things that happened, or didn't happen, right before and after he died on Christmas Day in 2006 were a bit odd. A decade after he died, the doctor who actually signed Brown's death certificate thought something was weird. Dr. Marvin Crawford told CNN, "He changed too fast. He was a patient I would never have predicted would have coded." But he died that night, and I did raise that question. What went wrong in that room? On the surface, it doesn't seem weird that the 73-year-old Brown would die while in the hospital, considering he had prostate cancer and diabetes. Plus, once he was admitted, Dr. Crawford diagnosed a recent small heart attack and early congestive heart failure. But under treatment, Crawford says Brown started to really improve. So him suddenly dying when things were looking up was definitely unexpected to this medical expert. And yet, Brown's daughter is mum on why, telling an interviewer, "I had my own personal reasons for not doing an autopsy. I don't want to talk about that." Later she reiterated to CNN, "I don't need an autopsy. That was the day that God chose to take him." Charlie Chaplin. In an obituary published 2 days after he died on Christmas Day in 1977, Variety called Charlie Chaplin, or Sir Charlie as he was in the last 7 years of his life, having been knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 1970, the greatest comic actor in motion picture history. But he also fell foul of the communist witch hunt craze that swept the US in the 1950s. After that, Chaplin moved to Switzerland, which is where he died, surrounded by family, on Christmas morning. "My husband died peacefully in his sleep during the night," his widow Una said. "The funeral will be private and restricted to the immediate family." She added, "All the presents were under the tree." Charlie gave so much happiness, and although he had been ill for a long time, it is so sad that he should have passed away on Christmas Day. Chaplin's health issues included needing a wheelchair and oxygen tank, as well as losing his hearing and sight, and having increasing trouble speaking. Despite this, his doctor, Henri Perrier, explained that in the end, it was nothing dramatic that killed him. Sir Charles died peacefully in his sleep from old age. He was buried in a Swiss cemetery, but would not rest for long. According to history, a few months later, grave robbers stole Charlie Chaplin's body and held it for ransom. George Michael. George Michael died on Christmas Day in 2016. He was discovered by his boyfriend of 5 years, Fadi Fawaz, who told The Telegraph, "We were supposed to be going for Christmas lunch. I went round there to wake him up, and he was just gone, lying peacefully in bed. George was looking forward to Christmas, and so was I. Now everything is ruined." The official cause of death was dilated cardiomyopathy. He came to the midnight service last year, but he didn't come this year. He decorated the garden with Christmas lights, so we knew he was there, but we didn't see him. It was thought George Michael spent his last night either alone or in the company of his housekeeper. In a double tragedy for George Michael's family, Rolling Stone says his sister Melanie Panayotou died suddenly exactly 3 years later to the day, making Christmas an especially sad time for the siblings' loved ones. Eartha Kitt. Eartha Kitt might have been compared to a cat by the press originally because of her last name, but it was an image she played into. Her obituary in the New York Times reported that she'd started her long career in the 1940s as a dancer before tackling Broadway, Hollywood, and the music industry. She succeeded at building a great body of work in all of them. But by the time she was 81, Kitt was suffering from advanced colon cancer. She died at her home on Christmas Day in 2008, with her daughter Kit Shapiro by her side. While that seems like the best death one could hope for, colon cancer is not a fun way to go. And when Shapiro gave an interview to Mommy Noir in 2013, she made her mother's death sound horrible. "I was with her when she died. She left this world literally screaming at the top of her lungs." Shapiro seemed to mean this as a good, or at least a characteristic thing, and she continued, "Up until the last 2 days, she was still moving around. The doctor told us she will leave very quickly and her body will just start to shut down. But when she left the world with a bang. She left it how she lived it. She screamed her way out of here, literally. I truly believe her survival instincts were so part of her DNA that she was not going to go quietly or willingly. Helen Joseph. The most famous leaders of the anti-apartheid fight in South Africa are, rightly, black, but they had some notable compatriots who practiced true allyship. One of the most dedicated was Helen Joseph. Encyclopedia.com's list of her anti-apartheid actions is far too long to include here, but rest assured she was charged with high treason, spent 2 5-year terms under house arrest, was banned twice, and spent 4 months in jail to avoid testifying against Winnie Mandela. In fact, the New York Times says Winnie considered Joseph to be family, and Nelson Mandela wrote to Joseph from his prison cell on Robben Island. Joseph was also declared a listed person, which was supposed to mean she wasn't allowed to be. Despite having cancer and a heart attack, Joseph held on long enough to see Nelson Mandela finally released from prison in 1990. And in March 1992, just shy of her 86th birthday, Joseph voted in the referendum to end apartheid. However, she died on Christmas Day of that year, so she did not live to see Mandela become president of South Africa. Dean Martin. Dean Martin is synonymous with a certain type of mid-century cool, dressed to the nines, drink in hand, crooning away in Las Vegas. It was an unexpected career path, according to his obituary in the Washington Post, since he dropped out of high school before trying to be a boxer and then getting a job as a steelworker. But Dean Martin's work with Jerry Lewis and the Rat Pack made him a household name. Still, the image he portrayed on stage wasn't his actual personality. For one, according to his daughter, he was drinking apple juice instead of whiskey. She says, he was so different from what everybody thought he was. There was no one who could do Dean Martin better than Dean Martin. Martin died on Christmas Day in 1995 at the age of 78. Heavy records that he'd been fighting 2 major health issues for years. His kidney problems had forced him into retirement shortly before he died, but it was complications from lung cancer and emphysema that would kill him. The drinks he had on stage might have been fake, but the cigarettes were real. Frank Sinatra was, of course, very affected by his friend's death. "Dean was my brother, not through blood, but through choice," Sinatra said. "Good times and bad, we were there for each other. Our friendship has traveled down many roads over the years, and there will always be a special place in my heart and soul for Dean." Nancy Roman. The Hubble telescope was groundbreaking when it was launched in 19... While STEM careers were dominated by men, one of the key people who helped make the famous satellite a reality was a woman, Nancy Grace Roman. In fact, she was so important to the project that she'd been dubbed the Mother of Hubble, according to her obituary in the Washington Post. Unsurprisingly, Roman faced an uphill battle getting the education and then career that she wanted. "I was told from the beginning that a woman could not be an astronomer," she said in a video released by NASA via space shortly before she died. Recalling an interaction with her high school guidance counselor, Roman said, "She looked down her nose at me and sneered, 'What lady would take mathematics instead of Latin?' When getting her PhD, her thesis advisor refused to talk to her for 6 months. But Roman prevailed, joining NASA as one of the first employees after it was created, as the first ever chief of astronomy. She made it possible to get early telescopes up into space to learn what needed to be learned, science historian Bob Zimmerman said. As soon as that technology started to mature, she was pushing for the design work. Her hard-nosed nature helped get the telescope built. Roman died on Christmas Day in 2018, aged 93, but not before living to see herself as a minifig in Lego's Women of NASA set. Billy Martin. When Yankees legend Billy Martin died in a car crash on Christmas Day in 1989, age 61, there was an immediate outpouring of sympathy from the baseball fraternity. Lou Piniella, who was friends with Martin and had played for him in the past, told the New York Times that Martin had lots of plans for the future. He was going to be more involved with the team. He was going to go to more Yankee games, help evaluate the team in spring training. He was enthused about doing these things. I got the feeling he was looking forward to managing one more time. Yankees owner George Steinbrenner said he had spoken to Martin just the week before, and they had discussed the upcoming holiday. He was excited about it, Steinbrenner said. He talked about how, when he was a kid at Christmas, he didn't do much. Martin's death was especially tragic. Sportscasting reports that Martin and his friend Bill Reedy were coming home from a bar early on Christmas morning when their car was in a single vehicle accident. It's not clear who was driving when they crashed, since Reedy survived but changed his story, saying he's been trying to protect Martin, who had serious issues with alcohol abuse his whole life. Reedy was eventually convicted of driving over the limit. Joan Miro. When he died on Christmas Day in 1984, the Spanish artist Joan Miro was already a legend. The New York Times called him an artist of the first rank who left an ineffaceable mark upon his century, while the Washington Post said he was one of the great masters and creators of modern art, and gave him credit for connecting the abstract art movements from early in the 1900s to the mid-20th century, influencing the work of greats like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko. By the time of his death, Miro already had works displayed in some of the best museums in the world, including New York's MoMA and the Guggenheim, as well as the Miro Foundation in Barcelona, which only showcased his work. This was perhaps not surprising, since Joan Miro made it to the ripe old age of 90. In the end, Miro's passing was not dramatic. He'd been having health issues you'd expect of someone in their 10th decade, including heart and lung ailments, and only 2 weeks before he'd been in the hospital because of difficulty breathing, and had been confined to his bed since then. But in his old age, Miro was still thinking about the future. "It's the young people who interest me, and not the old dodos," he said. "If I go on working, it's for the year 2000, and for the people." Harry T. Moore. There were innumerable horrific things done to black people during their fight for civil rights. But even with how long that list is, blowing up a house with the owners inside on Christmas Day in 1952, which was also their 25th wedding anniversary, has to be notable for its layers of evil. While both Harry T. and Harriet Moore would die because of the blast, Harriet held on until January 3rd, meaning she doesn't technically qualify for this list. But make no mistake, while Harry died on Christmas Day, Harriet was really murdered that day as well. The two were targets for their work for the Florida chapter of the NAACP, which they'd founded. The Zinn Education Project says Harry was the most hated black man in Florida. But Harry knew what he was doing. He told his mother, who was visiting him the Christmas he died, not to be concerned for his safety. "Every advancement comes by way of sacrifice. What I am doing is for the benefit of my race." After the terrorist attack that killed Harry, Langston Hughes wrote the Ballad of Harry T. Moore, which included the lines, and this he says, "Our Harry Moore, as from the grave he cries, no bomb can kill the dreams I hold, for freedom never dies."